Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. So all the rules are off now. It's no longer a closed class, although it's probably for this week and maybe a couple more weeks we'll keep it pretty much to the stuff we've been dealing with during the closed class and working there. Questions are invited, and questions during the talks, during the answers to questions are invited. The purpose of this is to explore the stuff we've discussed. Some of it was done rather lightly because there's so much stuff we could talk about that wasn't really time. I have 4, and I guess I now have 5 questions. Good. I have 5 questions, 4 of which were sent by email. Getting email questions is fine, and if you want to send me email questions, that's one way of getting your questions onto the floor anonymously, if that's what you would like. In general, I would rather not answer spiritual questions by email just because we're talking about stuff that's not intellectual and it's not easy to explain, and like I need visual feedback to see how the energy is reacting and see how the faces are reacting and see what's being heard, because this stuff is often so hard to communicate that all the feedback that's there is possible. But if you just want to get a question into the agenda and onto the table, that's a fine way of doing it. And I think we'll just start with the questions right away. Well, I should say that this is also being recorded, and I don't know what's going to happen with it. It may turn out to be CDs that will be sold, or it may turn out to be part of, I have no idea what. So be aware that anything you're sharing is on the mic and might wind up on somebody else's CD. And like we do in the workshops, if you want to share something that's private, say so, and I'll turn off the mics. But otherwise, it's being recorded, and it's not being recorded for a private page like we do in the workshops, where it's kept very, very private to the workshop. This could go anywhere. I have no idea what we're doing here. And it's not important. The first question is one about tithing. It says, I contribute money to family, friends, and employees quite often to enable their ability to participate in work that I feel enhances their spiritual, personal life. I don't contribute on a regular basis to any charities, just sporadically. You mentioned that when one tithes, it should be to an impersonal entity, organization, etc. Why is this? The real reason is that contributing money to your family, friends, and employees is what good human beings do as part of their work, and that's just a perfectly normal, perfectly good thing for human beings to do. Tithing is the idea of giving to God the first fruit of our labors. It's like the old idea the Greeks used to, when they filled a goblet with wine, pour a little bit of it onto the ground, which is like giving back to the earth what came from the earth. And in this work, we're acknowledging that whatever we have is coming from what is, from God, and we're giving it back to that. Usually we do that by supporting churches or impersonal things like that, but we may also choose to support almost any impersonal thing that is of a spiritual nature. Typically, it's we tithe to the places where we're being fed spiritually, like our church or what have you. But the idea is giving back to God that which is being given to us. Questions on that? Is that clear? Yeah.
We're giving of material. What does that have to do with God? We're giving money, or we're giving. It almost starts feeling like ritual.
Well, if you think you've got a body, then you're playing the game, playing this material game, and this is certainly being done in the material game. It is all part of the Leelaa. There's no question about that.
The difference is you're doing it to get something, or you're doing just to acknowledge. Is that the difference?
The real reason you're doing it is because you can. Here's the second part of this question. As an addendum to my question, is the percentage amount that one ties based on gross or net income, or does this question indicate that I'm not even in supply consciousness? The answer to that, of course, is that you tie at a percentage that you feel comfortable with, so it doesn't matter whether you're measuring it from your gross or your net, although Meg Johnson is sort of tough on that, and she says it's not okay to take the charitable deduction if the organization you're tithing to happens to be a charity, that it's not okay to take the charitable deduction because that's sort of like sneaking some back with the left hand. The reason, one of the primary reasons for tithing is it's a statement of your consciousness. If you're not tithing because you don't have enough, you are demonstrating in your life, I don't have enough, because my experience is the outpicturing of what I believe. If I'm coming from a position of I have, I can share, then my experience will be that I have, I can share. So that's why what we do is we start with the percent that's comfortable to us, that we can, that we have, that consciousness is true for us, that I know I can share this, and start tithing there. And what typically happens is that it's so effortless and becomes so much fun to pick places to tithe to, and the results do show up that people usually will start tithing more and more. Joel talks about people that started tithing with him that wound up tithing 80%, people that own large companies and wound up tithing 80% of their company's gross, and got quite wealthy doing that. Now, the Meg Johnson is very firm that the primary thing about tithing is I can, and we don't give it to people that because they need it. It's not, the purpose is not to solve somebody else's need. I don't give to the poor. I don't feed the poor because it will make any difference in the poor people's lives, because 3 days later they will be just as poor and just as hungry, because that's their consciousness out picturing, and whether I drop a meal into it or not is going to have no effect on their lives. But the effect is on my life, because I'm saying, look at the flow I have. And you may recall that we discussed that supply is outflow. So what I'm doing is outflowing. And outflowing to my children is not the same kind of outflowing. Outflowing to my children is just taking care of my family, is taking care of myself, and that's a different thing from giving freely of what I've been given.
I've been experiencing that in minor ways. Things like I repot a plant for somebody, and I do this kind of as a small business, but she was having some angst because she's having some money problems. It was just giving it to me just to let it go and say, what, Merry Christmas, don't sweat over it. It's not anything either to seem to hold on to, or things like, I run the vending machine for the company because it allows us to keep it at a low level, 50 cents a can, and I don't need to make a bunch of money. But when people ask, or when the method suits me, just to, here, have a Coke, it's just because I can,
because
not
because you can.
Percentage out, but just because for some reason suddenly it's just been wanting to.
And it's impersonal. It's not like slipping your kid a Coke.
Yeah, or looking for anything in return, saying, what? Sure.
That's the whole point.
Is there any similarity or any of the same result in just freely spending the money that you have because you believe that the supply is infinite, and maybe that it's not a donation, but it's doing whatever. If you're getting your car fixed, and where I used to come from a place of I got shop estimates and concern myself with whether I'm getting ripped off and everything else, where it doesn't matter. It's just a real, it doesn't matter attitude, because it's going to be taken care of and
Sure.
my supply is infinite.
Sure. Yeah. If your supply is infinite, then there's no need to concern yourself about it at all. And there's no law that says you need to tithe. Tithing was brought up really as a way to start the experience of supply, start building a supply consciousness. If you're coming from a lack consciousness or a I don't have enough consciousness, then tithing is a good way to get started. But if you're in the flow, stay in the flow. If it's working for you, stay there. Don't fix it.
And what would be the difference between tithing monetarily versus just being of service to who's ever in front of, what's the difference between giving money or giving your time, energy, and attention to whoever crosses your path? Would you put those on the same level?
Sure. Okay. Time is money, unless you don't. If you think you have a lot of time but no money, then you probably want to start tithing a little money. It's all in your head. There's no rules, and it's not in my head at all. It's all in your head. Yeah. You get to where it feels right, and it probably is. Yeah.
I had my experience through tithing was when I dropped out of church, I just started tipping the waitresses really well, like 50%, 100%. Tip them $20 and not even ordering them. And someone said to me, well, tithing is to glorify God, not to glorify yourself. And what I got was really good service from the waitresses. And I realized, for me, that's not tithing.
Yep, that's right.
And so I spoke with someone about tithing, and when I started putting it back into where I'm spiritually fed, and or like blood, then the miracles occurred in my life.
Sure. Yeah, it's your consciousness and it's your motive, and that's all there is to it. Know why you're doing it, and if you're doing it because you can, because you have the abundance that you can express, then do it, and that's supply consciousness, and that will reflect, and it also gets to be fun. It's fun picking places to tithe to leave money with, and you want to do it anonymously, in the sense of not letting the people around you know what you're doing. Joel is real clear that, if you're sending a check to the Boy Scouts, if you want to send money to the Boy Scouts of America, you don't need to send cash in an envelope. You can send a check with your name on it, because the people who are getting the check and putting it in the bank account are doing service to the Boy Scouts of America, just like you are. You're all participating in the activity of getting money to the Boy Scouts of America, but you do want to make sure that your name isn't listed anywhere as a donor, because now suddenly, if you're becoming a donor, it's self-serving. I used to sit in Rashneesh's, in Buddha Hall with Rashneesh, and he did a lecture every day, and then the next day he'd do questions, and he would always, he'd get questions that were sent in, and he'd pick the ones he wanted to answer, and he would always say, the first question. And so I'm real tempted to say, the second question, because that's the way he did it. So, the second question is not really a question so much as some real deep consideration of what was said in the class, which is really why we're all here. And I'll read it. This is my understanding of what you've said. What appears in my experience is an outpicturing of the ideas or concepts in my mind, but is nonetheless an appearance, an illusion. Yep, that's what I said. Exactly what it is. It's a picture or an illusion in mind. If my state of consciousness changes, either up or down, the people or situations, still appearances, that I experience will change. For instance, in one of the other audios, not from this class, on your site, I believe you said something to the effect that you noticed that when your consciousness rose a level, 2 or 3 people would drop out of your experience. And one of the Tuesday night classes, we talked about that. And what I said was that, I usually sponsor a bunch of people and walk with them. And what I said was that whenever I had done a closed class or something and my consciousness went up a level, usually 3 precisely of my babies would go to some other sponsor. And almost invariably within the same month, 3 new people would ask me to sponsor them. And it was always in threes, which I attribute entirely just to making sure I got the message, because, I need messages that are like a 2x4 up the side of the head. But it always happened in threes. And that was a reflection of the fact that my consciousness had moved to a place now where 2 or 3 of the people who'd been hanging around weren't keeping up and couldn't hang around and had to drop out of that consciousness and go somewhere else. And I finally come to a point now where 2 or 3 people could take advantage of what I had who couldn't before, because they were waiting for me to get to where I could be of use to them. So I always watch that happen, and that's exactly what I mean. If your level of consciousness changes, the people and things in your life will change. The change would also apply to things such as jobs, houses, supply, relationships, health, etc. Absolutely. It's your entire experience. It's a reflection of the content of your own personal beliefs. Will these things only change or drop from my experience to the degree that I have lost my aversion, hate, love, etc. for them? No. Your experience reflects what you believe. The list of things you love, hate, fear, or have aversion for, things like that, are just a list of the things that are holding you into your human consciousness. These are the things that are keeping you here, that are keeping you from having the enlightenment experience, that are keeping you from having the full-on experience of God, and they're tying you down. So they want to be dropped in that sense, but your experience is what you believe. Now, obviously, if you fear things, these things are in your beliefs, and you start experiencing the things you fear. That's what Scripture is all about, is fear and experiencing our fears. But they're not quite hardwired. Whether you have aversion or hate or love for it or not, whatever you believe is going to outpicture. And assuming my consciousness does rise a level, is it correct that the change will not necessarily be what I think is better, in quotes, healthier, happier, more harmonious? Yes, it might not be what you think is better, happier, healthier, or more harmonious. And let me read the last point, and then we can...
Will you read the last part?
That last point is, and assuming my consciousness does rise a level, is it correct that the change will not necessarily be what I think is better, healthier, happier, or more harmonious? And if so, isn't this a divergence from what is in my mind? Does it boil down to the fact that we can't necessarily expect to understand what should happen at any given point, since it's the will of what is and not mine that is to be done? All right, this is getting into the complicated things. Implied in this question is the whole thing of duality, that there is a me separate from God who can have and there certainly appears to be, by the way, that's why we're here, is that we all believe that there is one, but we're into duality here. Yeah. If we, let me say this right. if we understand that all there is consciousness, all there is what is expressed as individual impersonal consciousness, then all there is, I'm going to use the word God because that's easier to talk in this thing, but what is fine too. You know, all there is God fulfilling itself as me, okay? And God is, and see this, to even talk is introducing duality, but, you know, so I will use the words that God is eternal and harmonious and perfect and unchanging and done and all that. Really, God is outside of time. So all these changes are happening in the Leelaa, in the duality. The rising of my consciousness is not a reality. That's all in the Leelaa. That's the story of that's the storyline of this play that's going on, of this Lee creature who's following a path from ignorance to enlightenment, and the idea of my having a viewpoint of harmonious that's different from the viewpoint of harmonious of what is only conceivable in a relationship of dualism, of duality, of me separate from God. So that's going on here. But the other side of the question is that, you know, the whole word harmonious, that what is infinitely harmonious, but infinitely harmonious has really no meaning in the Leelaa. In my sense, I have no idea what infinitely harmonious outside of space and time means. I can't possibly have any concept of that. So harmonious is interpreted in my experience by me. Meg says that God creates, mind forms, and intellect interprets. So, you know, my sense of supply will manifest. I mean, if I have supply consciousness, it will manifest as supply that is adequate to meet my needs. And Meg gives a wonderful example. She says, you know, if I'm a mountain girl, my sense of home will manifest as a lovely cabin in the mountains somewhere. And if I'm a sea girl, my sense of home will manifest as a seaside cottage. So it's my intellect, it's my personal, this is the personal sense that doesn't exist, but it's my personality that is interpreting it. So the fact is that as my consciousness rises, my experience will be more harmonious, consistent with my definition of harmonious, because that's the only definition of harmonious there is. All right, let's say it. There is no God except in an enlightened consciousness. Okay? God is a concept that's in enlightened consciousness. So the only God there is the God that I experience through my enlightened consciousness, to the extent that my consciousness is enlightened. And so harmonious has to interpret, if God is harmonious, has to interpret as harmonious within the extent of my enlightened consciousness. And there is no God except the God that's in my enlightened consciousness, or your enlightened consciousness is the only God that's in your experience. Did that get said right?
Yeah, it didn't make sense.
Oh, good, then it's probably right. That's a sure sign that it's truth. Okay, ask some questions. Let's play with this a while if you want to, because this is really hard to explain. The bottom line is that as your consciousness grows, as your awareness, let's don't say that, as your awareness of God grows, which means that as your awareness of the content of your consciousness expands, then there will be more harmony and more abundance and more everything in your life, and it will conform to your ideas of that. God is not off on one plan and you're off on a different plan, because the more aware you become of the presence of God, the less possible it is for you to have a plan that's separate, because the more you are aware of the presence of God, the less you there is. Okay? That's clear.
As the concepts start to break down, what should be start to break down.
Yeah,
Disappear.
there's no one to have it. It's all about dropping that illusory personal self.
Where did that come from in the first place?
I guess God's just playing with himself. I really don't know. There are all sorts of creation myths and stuff like that people get into, but the fact is that all there is consciousness, and consciousness with nothing in it isn't conscious, so there has to be something in it. And why? And it's outside of time and space, so it's finished in any conceivable sense of the word. And so why we're doing this Leelaa, which we really aren't doing, is because that's the way it is, because that's what is. And there's no answer to that I have ever heard anybody willing to offer.
Purpose has no meaning.
Huh?
Purpose has no meaning. When
Yeah, purpose has no meaning at all. It's Leelaa means the play of the gods. It's God playing. It's God doing God, and people say things that sort of click and sound like they make sense, but it's nonsense. But people say things like, you can't experience health unless you know sickness. So if God wanted to experience all the bliss and health and perfection of everything, it would have to also experience the other side of it. Or you can simply say that the minute you create mind, you now do have time and space, and therefore there is change, and therefore there is duality. And in duality, the perfection implies the opposite of that. I mean, it's always the other end of the stick, of the same stick. I mean, within this human situation, both things come as a package. I mean, the human situation is the dual situation. But that's nonsense as far as offering a reason for it to be. Why it's this way. The fact is, it is this way, so to speak. The other thing is to keep in mind is that the person who is seeing all this illusion in the Leelaa is in the Leelaa, is part of the illusion, okay? So the one who's asking the question and seeing all the illusion is just part of the illusion, so that one doesn't exist either. So it really starts not making much sense. Yeah. Which may explain why I said in the first class that we really don't want to use our intellects. This is, a small, finite pea-brain trying to grasp infinite concepts. Yeah, what did you have?
So what I heard the question saying is that as I grow in my awareness of the spiritual reality, do I become less able to fool myself into believing that I know what's good and what's bad as I go through experiences in humanhood? In other words, maybe good means my husband dies or this, you know what I mean? Whatever. And then I could think myself, oh, this is good or this is bad, but I'm becoming less able to discern or less likely to fool myself into thinking I know what the human picture is supposed to look like.
That certainly is true. That the higher you get, the clearer you get in consciousness, the less you'll be able to fool yourself about your own definition of good and bad. But that's not what I read the question as meaning. I read the question as meaning that perhaps God's plan for me and my plan for me might be in conflict, and I might not think that God's plan for me was harmonious, whereas the plan I have is harmonious. And I'm saying that God doesn't have a plan for you because you aren't. God has fulfilled itself already, and you are realizing that. And the path you are taking to the realization of the fact that God is completely fulfilled as itself may or may not include the details of it which you're constructing will in fact get more harmonious as you become clearer. But they certainly may not be harmonious at any given level of consciousness. Mm-hmm.
You talked about the evolution of the idea of God and this place where we are now. How do we know this is the end? Or if this is really just the beginning, it's our understanding, or it's an understanding of what God is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely not the end. There is no reason to think that any concept that you have as God is the end. In fact, if you have a concept of God, it's not correct. If there's a you to have a concept of God, it's not correct.
Well, when I think of God, I don't necessarily think of Him as a man's image or anything like that. I mean, that is, well, thinking of it in terms of being consciousness and being produced through consciousness. I mean, if I visualize it, again, I'm not easy to explain, but I mean, I can see it going deeper and deeper and deeper. That's kind of like what I visualize. It's almost like when you're looking into a mirror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as there's a you trying to understand God, you will forever go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you will not fathom it. And that may be the experience you're having right now, that the more you grasp it, the more there is to grasp, and you'll go deeper and deeper and deeper.
Rather than just accepting that that's what it is.
Well, accepting that's what is the booby prize. There's no payoff in that at all. That doesn't, accepting it or having the intellectual knowledge of it or the understanding will have absolutely no effect on your experience or your enlightenment or anything at all. It's having the experience that is what we're shooting for, not understanding it. The understanding it is really just sort of like the hand pointing at the moon. That's just an indication of the direction to go in, so to speak.
So that you can't really realize God if you're not enlightened.
That's right. That's right. The end result is the only result. You can have more and more awareness of the presence of God. That's the progress that we all go through. We experience more and more of the presence of God. Every one of these truths, every one of those 36 points that we did in the last class can be taken with and worked with for a year, and it will settle out of your intellect down into your knowing that that's true, and the picture will change. Okay? And as you do more and more of those, you will get clearer and clearer, but you'll still be a human being getting clearer and clearer until perhaps sometime, this lifetime or the next one or 10 from now, you will have a full-on mystical experience and experience absolutely the presence of God. And when that happens, there's no doubt about it. Okay? Until then, it's getting a deeper and deeper and deeper sense of what's going on. But if you will check, there's something in you that knows what's right and what's wrong. I mean, you will know if you're going in the right direction. You will know that this is true. You will know that feels right, okay? When I say it feels right or it sounds right or I'm using enough sense terms without referring to my physical senses, I'm talking about the spiritual discernment that's developing me, and it feels right. It is the spiritual sense that's growing in me that's now discerning what's true. And Barbara says we have a radar for truth, that we know what's true when we hear it. And the reason for that is your reality is God. God is expressed as you. There's not a you separate from God. God is expressed as you, and all we're talking about is not changing anything that's already true right now. We're talking about how aware you are right now of what's eternally true. And that awareness is a pipe that is expanding. And that's what the process feels like, is that we get more and more, we get clicks. Oh, that's what that, oh, I see, we say with our eyes closed. That's what that meant. Oh, shit, that's what that meant. All my awarenesses, my deep clicks, are always followed immediately by, oh, fuck, you know? Yeah, I mean, and I slap my head, because that's what it always feels like, you know? Oh, fuck, yeah. And then I got it. I got that one, okay? And usually that'll open up 3 or 4 more, and that's always these clicks. And I've had lots of those clicks at that level that, and now I've dropped another level. And as that happens, your experience changes and everything opens up. But again, that's an experience. Don't take my word for it, you know. Do it. Immerse yourself in it to the extent that you can and start experiencing the clicks. Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about, germs and, not doing, and by getting a flu shot to avoid the germs, you're actually inviting them. And tying that with, my reality being out picture and my consciousness, I find it hard when something like when I started to get sick last week, or like if a rash appears, then I start to think like, did I outpicture that? And I get real confused, like with the whole physical manifestations when I really wasn't, as far as I know, outpicturing that, and I was trying to get myself out of even acknowledging, that those things quote existed and that I could be affected by them, and then they happen.
Yeah, I hear that, and the comment was not that getting flu, inviting is not a bad word really, but the comment is that if you believe flu shots have power, then you believe the germs they're designed to kill have power. And so you are in flu consciousness, okay? And you've just become a statistic. Some will get flu this year, some won't. The rest of the question, though, is that I don't have to I can catch diseases I've never heard of. Right? And that is not something I'm out picturing. People catch diseases they've never heard of all the time, so it's not something they're explicitly out picturing. But the beliefs of all these diseases is in human consciousness, and human consciousness is radiating it at us, and we are picking it up, and we're available to it. Any idea, any belief which I don't explicitly have is defaulting to human consciousness if I'm being human and in line with human consciousness. If I'm believing in doctors and doing stuff like that, then I'm in the human consciousness about that, and that's what's radiating to me. And there's lots of stuff that I can give you later. Joel talks a lot about protective work. And protective work is not the work of protecting myself from flu, it's protecting myself from human consciousness's belief in flu, okay? Or protecting myself from human consciousness belief in all the powers other than God. And so the work is not in eradicating your belief in flu. The work is in the morning establishing your belief that God is the only power and that nothing else has a power. Okay? And going back to that statement, to that belief, lifting yourself, and it's not as simple as an affirmation, although that may be the start, but lifting yourself to the belief, to the knowledge, to knowing that God is the only power. And going back as many times a day as you have to relift yourself to the place where you know God is the only power is the epitome of protective work.
So if I'm understanding you, if I'm not rooted in that belief that God is only power, then my experience can also be affected by world consciousness.
Will be. What you're not actively doing, human consciousness is passively doing for you. It's all happening subliminally, and you're getting you go along for the ride.
So there's no such thing as innocence in that context.
Or it's all innocence. It's all innocence, it's all ignorance. I mean, I don't know how you're using the word innocence. I mean, certainly I have no, my only error is ignorance. Man, I don't know, people who are ignorant are often innocent because they don't know they're ignorant. That sounds pretty innocent.
And that gets the personalness of error.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is impersonal. The human consciousness radiating it, the target they're picking on, and the whole thing is absolutely impersonal. Did you have? I saw a hand.
Well, it was kind of like about this, but healing. So I sprained my ankle, so I put it on 3 pillows, and then I'm reading Joel, and it's saying the only healing I need is being the consciousness. So I'm assuming my body is just doing what it does. The healing is not the pillow, the legs are elevated. The healing is I'm just in the consciousness, but my body's just doing what it is doing. That's why I was like, well, here I'm reading about healing, and then I have this false belief that my leg needs to be lifted.
Yep, that's right. That's a conflict. That's true.
Around my house.
If you had called Joel and said, I think I just sprained my ankle, you would probably almost immediately say, oh no, I guess I didn't. And there would be no question of elevating it or pillows or stuff like that. Of course, working on yourself is a difficult thing to do because feeling the pain and elevating the ankle and knowing it's not true are sort of a difficult thing to put together. You are the hardest one to practice your healing on, although you certainly are the most available.
Even on a mind level, you can experience small parts of that by being able to desensitize yourself to chronic pain or something like that. Just even on a mind level, you can just get a glimpse of it.
I think the healing if this wasn't needed.
Could be. But people, they can be very dramatic as well. Yeah, Joe.
I believe during the class that you described a method of meditation, like Joel, how he talked about it. And I guess it's 2 parts. One is, I know I can listen to it on the CD, but I haven't located which one it is. I was wondering if you could repeat that, where you're taking a spiritual saying. And then
I think I'm going to let you go find that on the CD,
Okay.
plus there are lots of Joel tapes in which he teaches meditation, probably 100 of them.
The other part to that question was if I'm able to do that, or to try to do that, would that be considered a more direct way to expand my awareness as opposed to maybe tithing? Or do they both have equal?
Yeah, tithing doesn't expand your awareness. Tithing is working specifically on a particular belief in your head and correcting it. Like kid work is working on particular beliefs in your head and correcting them. The way you expand your awareness is meditation. In one of 100 forms, 108. Bhagwan said 108 forms of meditation, not to mention all the combinations thereof. But no, there are a lot of ways, but the spiritual practice, sadhana, meditation, is the way you expand your awareness. Let's move on. The third question. Joel frequently refers, these are thoughtful questions, I just love them. Joel frequently refers to God's love, in fact, God's limitless, unbounded love, in quotes, Joel says that God is love, God loves and cares for us, and God's love flows freely to us. What does Joel mean? What is he trying to say when he talks about God's love? Is it just a balm to help us through the experience? Is he speaking on a different level? And how does a non-anthropomorphic is express love? Is it akin to grace? Great stuff. Joel is talking to people at a particular level in consciousness, mostly the Christian Science and New Thought and Unity people. And so he's pretty well tied into the Christian vocabulary. Do you see that God's love flowing to us is a statement, it assumes that there's duality? That's a statement of duality. God's love flowing to us, okay? And so immediately then we start getting into all sorts of questions of interpreting what love means. Whereas the truth is that God is expressed as whatever, that what is expressed as whatever it's expressed as. And every aspect of it is part of it. And so any love that it's expressing or that's flowing is flowing from itself to itself, outside of time. It's a done deal. So love is the state of, the only thing that love could be is the state of God's relationship with itself, outside of time eternally. And, now we're way away from being able to talk about love or anything. But that's what happens when you get non-dual. When you come into the Leelaa, then we all have experience of love, of loving people, of loving each other. We don't have the experience of being loved typically, although we see people do things that make us think they love us, but really the only experience of love we have typically is the experience of love we feel for someone else. And that certainly is our interpretation of something real. And it's something that grows, we can love more and more. And that certainly is, we can say God's love flowing out through us because that's what it looks like in time. Or we can say that it's this, whatever God feels about itself outside of time in the eternal consciousness. But, there is something about love that we experience that flows through us, and it certainly is true that if you want more love in your life, you can love more, and it certainly is true that the love in your life will increase just by giving it out, and that certainly is an expression of God's love, as closely as we can possibly talk about an expression of God's love. The other thing is that very consistently the people who have mystical experiences who have very high experiences, not necessarily mystical, I guess, not necessarily mystical in the sense of completely unitive, but who have very high experiences feel an incredible amount of love. There's just this amazing feeling of love, much more so than any feeling of love in the 3D world. And that's another reason that people, the enlightened masters, talk about God is love. It's certainly just an aspect of whatever this consciousness is, but a very real one that people in high elevated states of consciousness experience. Another word for it is bliss. Another word for it is ecstasy. And those of us who are not in that experience can be lifted into much more of that experience by someone who is very high. That's happened to me twice. Once by each of my gurus have lifted me into a place of overwhelming, mind-boggling feeling of love that couldn't possibly have anything to do with either of them, since neither of them was in the room at the time, but which was definitely them doing it. So there is something And it's an overwhelming feeling of love out there somewhere, or in there somewhere. But I think usually when Joel's talking about God's love flowing to us, I think he's also talking about, in all aspects, which is like includes grace. I was going to say supply is a experience, and supply could be talked about as an expression of God's love. And the question is this, what is it? Is it the same thing as grace? And yeah, it's absolutely the same thing as grace. It's all the same thing as grace. It's, realizing the presence of God is what grace means, and realizing that does result in your experience containing more love, harmony, supply, health, all those things. Any one of us can get lifted to where we have easily adequate supply to meet all of our needs at a level that we're very comfortable living at, and any one of us can operate at a level where we easily avoid 80 or 90% of the diseases going around, or the physical mishaps going around, or the dramatic relationship mishaps going around. Any one of us can expect in this lifetime, in the near future, to be lifted to the point where our experience is 80, 90% more harmonious than the average experience of those around us. That's just something that we see all the time. Okay? Now we have a new question. If everything is an illusion, what is the purpose of that word? It's harder when the light gets dim. So you got the reading glasses?
No, well, if I'm farsighted, so how you did it.
If everything is an illusion, what is the purpose of saying in the class that all humans are at different levels in their spiritual awareness? Honest question. Honest question. The reason for saying that, both are true. Within the illusion, and being human is part of the illusion. Within the illusion, as the story goes, as the Leelaa goes about us growing from states of ignorance to enlightenment, we are all at different levels. That's what that means. The reality is that we are all always eternally enlightened and always have been. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am, meaning that his enlightenment was eternal, and all of our enlightenment is eternal, and this is, and that's the truth. And there are no levels of consciousness, but within the story, within the Leelaa, there are different levels of awareness of who we are, and that's what I mean by levels.
Can I ask a whole new question?
I have one more question to go, and then we'll start new questions. And this one's sort of interesting too. Oh yeah, on this one.
So the degree that you are committed or invested in the illusion would be the degree to which you are experience duality in terms of power, like good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
The more that you're in that, the more there's going to be that whole sense that...
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the less...
Yeah, in other words, the extent to which you believe you're human is the extent to which you're aligned with the human consciousness and buying all those beliefs.
Sickness and health and,
and all that stuff.
Yeah,
the answer always, if you could always hold in your consciousness the awareness that I am the one life, then none of this could possibly happen. But there is only one life, and it is the life of all of us and every one of us and each of us individually, then you couldn't be sick or see sickness. Which was pretty much the place Joel operated from, which was pretty much why Joel would often effect healings on people before he got the letter. Because when they wrote the letter and mailed it, they reached out to him and they touched this consciousness, which was always knowing that it's all God's life and that your life is God's life and everybody's life is God's life. And so Joel hasn't got the letter yet, but by reaching out to him, you touched his consciousness and you get the healing. You know, that happened lots of times. So, yeah, that's a pretty high extreme of a guy who was just never, essentially never, he was at the 99% probably, not contacting human consciousness, whereas I'm saying that any one of us can expect to reach the 80% level or the 85% level as far as rising above the misfortunes of humanity that offer themselves to us. This includes...
Can you classify it to 20%?
This includes automobile accidents and everything like that. You don't need to experience any of that. Mm-hmm.
Is there, can you get a gauge on where you are as far as awareness by how few scripts you have? I mean, does that equate?
It does. Certainly, if your life is completely script-ridden, then, you know, and it is very dramatic, then you're very much in the human consciousness, which means that particular false belief that's driving all of that. The surest yardstick of spiritual progress that I know is non-reaction. To the extent that you don't react to things.
You mean instant reaction?
Yeah, I don't mean clearly now, but to the extent that you have no reaction to things is a pretty good measurement of how far you've come spiritually. And if you were completely risen, then you would know that it's all an illusion and there'd be no reason of reacting to anything ever. And I have known a man who never reacted. Robert never reacted. Awesome. Very strange. Yeah.
Didn't Rashneesh run around all whacked out for a year or something? Even as he was enlightened, he still was.
All whacked out is probably not a very good term.
Well, I don't know, but I don't know. I don't know what term you use.
I'm certain I didn't use that. Rashneesh certainly did run around India for 10 years after he was enlightened. Rabble-rousing, I think was the term I used. And there's absolutely no reason to think that an enlightened person couldn't be a rabble-rouser. Well, he was having great fun. He was going. I mean, Rajneesh's greatest thing was trying to demonstrate to anybody who held something sacred that it wasn't sacred. And so he was essentially wandering around India, talking. You know, it's like the old political tours in the United States where they talk from the back of railroad cars and pulled on to the next town. And he was essentially dumping on Mother Teresa, Mahatma Gandhi, and the Gandhi who was currently the Prime Minister of India. You know, it was pretty broad spectrum paintbrush, you know, and you know, he was just having fun with all those people, and he very carefully, you know, put a finger in any open wound as far as things that people thought were sacred and that had no relationship to God, you know, which is everything.
So, it's like, then you right, a good indicator of like getting out of the Leelaa is like your reaction to things.
Is having no reaction.
Having no reaction, right? So, I mean, and, you know, the way I interpret that is reaction. At first, I thought just the bad things, but you're talking about even good reaction, like happiness, and It's me hearing that.
Reacting to good things is certainly just as susceptible as reacting to bad things.
Right, so,
Hearing that your baby is sick and reacting to that is one example. Hearing that your baby just got well and reacting to that is another example, because they're both illusory. There is no baby.
because I would hate that I was going through life like, so blah.
Well, if you don't want to go through your life and
But I don't like the misery and the drama.
but if you get rid of all the misery and all the drama and all the dwelling and everything, then you'll just have to go through it at a level state of bliss and ecstasy.
Oh,
Wow.
Or not. Yeah, please.
A really, really good word around that, reacting, non-reacting, is being neutral. You know, it's not, it's not like a lack of emotion, or it's not like, it's just, when I found that word, I'm neutral around whatever the thing was that would normally trigger me up or down. If I'm neutral, I'm in a really, place of non-reaction. It does not mean I'm in a place of, like she said, blah. Being neutral is not being blah. If that's a good word, it helped me a lot.
Joel does point out real clearly when he's talking about healing that, when you're called upon for a healing, he says, don't rejoice when the temperature drops. Because, now you've lost your whole healing consciousness because it shows that you believe.
Oh, what fun is that?
Yeah, I know. but now you're locked into the wanting to see results, as if you thought that a healthy human being was real and an unhealthy human being was illusory, or a healthy human being was good and an unhealthy human being was bad, and it's all illusion,
So we're supposed to call when we're sick and when we're well.
That's right.
Have an appearance of wellness.
Please, I'm really happy today.
So the reaction is just the level for which you identify with the real. Just like the way you identify your subconscious with
right.
you in your dream. Once you realize you're in a dream, you can sit back and watch it and enjoy the movie.
That's right.
And once you realize that you're not the events that you are appearing to witness in your life, and you are not what other people think you are, then you can relax and watch the movie.
Yeah. If you know it's a movie, like we go to the movie and we get caught up in what's going on, and I just keep thinking if somebody in the back would just open the door a little bit so there was just a little bit of a sheen of external light on the screen so you could see the screen, then you'd be aware during the entire movie that it was on a screen and you were looking at lights, and your reaction would just dwindle to nothing, and if you can just be aware that what you call space is consciousness, and that these are all images on the consciousness, then your reaction is next to nothing, because it's all you. Let me touch briefly on the fifth question, and it's going to be quite brief, but it's just sort of an interesting question. Somebody said, would you say something about bodhisattvas? And I'll say very little because I'm certainly not a Buddhist scholar, but the idea about a bodhisattva is one who is getting higher and higher in consciousness, and they get almost to the point that they're enlightened, and they refuse to take the final step of enlightenment, and instead vow to come back eternally, lifetime after lifetime, until every sentient being is enlightened. And the point being that once you take the final step and achieve enlightenment, that you don't come back anymore. So they make certain not to take that final step so that they can come back and save all of sentient beings. And it's a lovely serving vow, and it certainly shows a great deal of compassion and all of that. But the bodhisattva and the becoming enlightened and the not taking the final step and the coming back and doing it again and again and again and again is still all part of the Leelaa. It's all in the Leelaa. It's all illusion. And I love the 3 or 4 really clear enlightened guys that I've heard comment who say, Get enlightened first and then see who you want to save. And the point is, of course, that if you're enlightened, there's nobody to save. You know? You're out of the Leelaa. There's nobody to save. I mean, you wake up in the morning and do you want to go back into your dream and fix the people that were hungry? I mean, it's really not high on your list to go back and feed the hungry that you dreamed about last night, you know? Or the unenlightened, I think. So, and that's as much as I know about that. So, a new question. And then we'll call it quits.
I was reading the other day, and I've read it before, where Joel says, "Speak, Father, thy servant heareth." And my thought was that too is not honoring omniscience. It's kind of like, "Dear God, please keep my family healthy." But maybe there's something that I'm missing in that.
It's not quite like that, but it certainly is very anthropomorphic and very dual. What he's saying is, and that particular quote probably comes out of one of the Psalms, you know, and he really loves quotes out of the Bible, but what he's saying is that the true state of prayer is one of listening, with no goal, not wanting anything, not expecting anything, not needing anything, not having any sense that God has overlooked anything or forgotten anything, but listening in the sense of expanding your awareness of the presence of God. Okay? And then what happens is that God, as God, the impersonal expression that you happen to be associated with, becomes more evident in your life. And that's what Joel says is the real valid prayer, is doing the back to you, Joe, doing the contemplation and reading the truth, and then doing the contemplation and contemplating on it until you get quiet, and then listening. And that particular phrase just happens to be the one he invariably uses when he's talking about being quiet and listening. But all he means really is being aware of the presence of God and letting that expand. Okay?
I have a question about that.
All right.
I read today that true prayer is praying until, and I'm going to use the word realize, but true prayer is praying until you realize there's nothing to pray about. And then there's the presence of God. But then I also read, once you hit that presence, just get up and walk away and go on with your life.
Mm-hmm.
But I like sitting in that.
Okay.
So I'm going to do it.
I don't have a problem with that. Typically, having gotten quiet enough to realize the presence of God, shortly thereafter your mind will fire up again and you'll start thinking. And Joel's saying, if that happens, okay, fine, get up and go about your business. You've experienced the presence of God, and that's done what it's going to do for you, whether it was for 1 second or 10 minutes. You've experienced the presence of God, and it will manifest in your life. It will externalize. You have been in, you've had your belief system, your consciousness linked with what is rather than with human consciousness, and it will manifest. So make the contact, make the contact and watch it manifest. Joel talked about when he discovered that he would do that every morning until he actually felt the presence, and then he'd go to work. And of course his day was entirely different than if he didn't do that. And when he was a beginner, he used to get up at 4:30 in the morning so that he would make sure there was time enough for that to happen. And he would sit there 2 hours, 3 hours, as long as it took to get that 1 minute. And that's what he's talking about. And then immediately his head would start chattering, but it didn't matter, because having made that contact, your life has changed in that minute. So that's what he's saying there. If you can stay there forever, stay there forever. The silence, is another word for the silence is the peace of God that passeth all understanding. It's very peaceful. You know, I mean, there's no reason not to sit there if you're experiencing the peace. And nobody yapping at your heels, why not? Well, this feels like a good thing. Let's do it again next Monday night. Let's get quiet. If you email your questions, I can print them out in large print and dark print. If you number 13 or 14 font. If you write your questions, please do it with a dark pencil or with a black
crayon.
Pentel. No, we don't need crayon, but a black Pentel type thing, you know, a black magic marker would be fine. Thanks, guys.